Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man's channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for my first video in my new home, and for this special occasion I'm going to be doing an album ranking of the Italian Gothic metal bands known as Lacuna Coil. So there are 10 albums here which I'm going to be ranking from my least favourite to my favourite in the usual format. I'm not including any live albums here, any EPs or the re-recording of Comely's. These are just their 10 original studio albums getting the ranking treatment here. Do let me know in the comments how you'd rank these albums. And remember, this is just my opinion on this band's discography. It's likely to be different from your own. I always enjoy doing this and respecting, what other people's tastes are like and their opinions of these bands, as well as sharing my own. Lacuna Coil are bands. Interestingly, I've kind of dipped in and out of over the years. I know their heyday was back in the early 2000s through the release of albums like Comely's and Unleashed Memories, for example. And when I'm listening to them, I do usually enjoy their music. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of the band. But I've actually enjoyed quite a significant amount of their material over the years. A small bit of history for you: they were formed back in 1994 under a different name called Sleep of Rights. They changed the name again to Ethereal in the 1990s before finally settling on Lacuna Coil in 1997. Of course, their debut album was to follow not too long after that in 1999. That was In a Reverie. So now I've gotten that spiel and introduction out of the way, let's crack on with this album ranking from my least favourite album at number 10 to my very favourite at number 1. And this is an interesting one for me to do because it's the first ranking I think I've done in a while where I wasn't set on what my number 1 album was going to be. And a lot of these album rankings in the past, I've usually made my mind up pretty quickly about what my favourite album is. But for this band, that was a bit harder to do because I changed my mind a couple of times. So anyway, that's enough for the introduction. So let's start with my least favourite album here, coming in at number 10, which is going to be Shallow Life, released back in 2009. So this album felt like it was a conscious decision from the band to do something different, and I just don't think it really worked. It was more stripped back, a softer sound for the most part. But for me, where Lacuna Coil are at their most effective is their most powerful, with the big Christina choruses, the big instrumental moments, the Andrea Ferro growls and his vocals. So there wasn't so much of that to really enjoy here. I didn't think the album just fell flat for me production-wise too. I do like the song Wide Awake, but for me this one didn't exactly keep me wide awake for its entire duration. So for that reason, Shallow Life here comes in as my least favourite album at number 10. Now at number 9 is possibly controversial, as I've gone for the most recent album, Sleepless Empire, which for me was just underwhelming, and particularly after the album that came before, Black Anima, without wanting to give too much away as to where I've placed that particular record. I do find that this album, it just kind of, it's heavy, but without having the potency, I think, of some of their previous records. And I don't know why that is, maybe a production thing. It may just be for me that the songs just aren't quite as interesting, particularly in the latter half of the record. I do like the singles Oxygen, Gravity, and Wish You Were Dead, which is why this album is higher than my least favourite record. But, overall, this one just didn't really land for me. So Sleepless Empire comes in at number 9. Coming in next, at number 8, I've got their debut album, In a Reverie, and I do enjoy the sound of this album, and it does have songs that I enjoy, like Circle, To Myself I Turned, and Falling Again, for example. But for me, this one it's never really kind of wrapped itself around me much. It was an album I had to revisit a lot to really kind of form my opinion on this one, because I didn't remember it very well, and in fact I can't even remember when I first listened to this record, to be honest. I think it's just okay for me. Like I say, I like its sound, but it's very much kind of zeitgeist at the time, but it doesn't offer too much in the way of variation, I have to say, for me, this one. So that's why In a Reverie comes in at number 8. Now next up at number 7, this is definitely, I'd say, controversial, because critics and fans alike seem to really love this album, and yet I never fully understood the hype or adoration behind this one. This is Delirium from 2016, coming in as my number 7. And I can hear gasps, audible gasps from you as I say that. Now, I can understand somewhat, I think, why the album has popularity. I do feel that, there is a certain punch with this album. I do think there are strong performances as well, but for me, I just don't find the songs all that interesting. I know you have, some popular tracks on here like House of Shame, Blood, Tears, and Dust. I personally actually quite enjoy the track My Demons as well towards the end of the album, but I just don't feel that structurally this album has much going on that really grabs me personally, and the songs I find kind of boring, to be quite honest. Like I say, I know this is going to be controversial, but you want honest rankings, you'll get an honest ranking, and I just don't really enjoy Delirium much compared to other albums on this list, and that's ultimately what this comes down to. Next up at number 6, I'm going for their second album, Unleashed Memories, from 2001. And I feel like this was where they were really finding their stride, Lacuna Coil, after the first album, In a Reverie. There's definitely more potency for me on this record. There's definitely bigger Christina moments vocally. There's definitely a stronger material overall here. I really love the first half of this album in particular. I feel like this is where you're hearing Lacuna Coil approaching their very best. And, songs like To Live Is To Hide, Purify, and When a Dead Man Walks are my favourites here. I believe those are all kind of first, if I remember rightly, the first half of the album. But, solid album. Still not one of my favourites from the band, but pretty good nevertheless. And next up, at number 5, we've got the first album, which I'd consider as a candidate for Dark Horse Discs, the series which is making a return to the Green Man in the not too distant future. So, Dark Adrenaline is my number 5. This came out in 2012, and I feel like this was a good comeback album for the band after the disappointment of Shallow Life in 2009. Dark Adrenaline, it does, it's quite a heavy album, but it offers just about enough variety for me as well to keep it interesting. I absolutely love the ballad on here, End of Time. And what I find interesting about Dark Adrenaline as well is Andrea Ferro takes more centre stage, I feel like, with the vocals and more of the choruses on this record than is typical for Lacuna Coil. But actually it works well for this particular record. I feel like, we're still getting quite a lot of Christina's vocals too, but the interchange is working well here. The emotion's coming through better than it did certainly on the previous album, Shallow Life. And I just feel that overall Dark Adrenaline is a good solid comeback album, and that's my number 5 choice. I enjoy, as I say, tracks like End of Time, My Spirit, I Don't Believe in Tomorrow is a bit of a banger as well. I think I really enjoy that song, so that's my number 5 choice. Coming in next at number 4 is another album I think could be on Dark Horse Discs, and this is one which actually got quite mixed reviews, so perhaps it's also an album which would be considered for Is It That Bad? But I really actually think this is a pretty great record, and I feel like it's definitely one that goes under the radar, being kind of in the middle era of Lacuna Coil. And the last album actually to feature certain band members before their departures, like Cristiano, I think Mozzati and Cristiano Migliore, were to depart the band after the release of this record. So, Broken Crown Halo, I think it's a dark horse. I think it's got some really solidly performed tracks on. I do think it has some good hooks on. I think it's got some very strong songs as well. I like the way the songs are developed on this album generally. I mean, you still have some of that repetition here and the classic Lacuna Coil formula thing happening, but it's effective on this album, I think. I love Hostage to the Light, I Forgive, but I Won't Forget Your Name, and Infection are my 3 favourites from this album. There's my number 4 choice. Broken Crown Halo from 2014 comes in as my number 4. Now we get down to what I would call the real deal albums here. These next 3 albums, I think, are all fantastic albums. They're the cream of the crop of the Lacuna Coil records, and I would absolutely say these, for me, are the very best of what Lacuna Coil have had to offer over the years. And there is, yes, I think you're going to be a little surprised with what's to come here. So at number 3, I've got Comalies. Maybe you thought this was going to be my number 1. Did you think it was going to be my number 1? Did you think Comalies was going to be a number 1? Not quite. I think this is a great album. And I do think this is where they found their formula and they went with it, and they just managed, I think, to also tap into a zeitgeist in that time where, this kind of music was really taken off for the likes of Evanescence as well, getting very popular about the time of the release of Comelys in 2002. One for die-hard fans, I think, you know, it's ranked actually 59th greatest album of the 21st century by Metal Hammer. You've got classics on here like Swamp's Tightrope, as well as a song I really enjoy. I know lots of people like the other single on this one is A Heaven to Lie, but for me, I actually like a couple of deep cuts on here. I really like the deep cut. I think it's Unspoken on this album as well. There's a lot to enjoy on this album. I do think it rightfully holds its status as you know, perhaps their most popular album as well, one of their most recognisable albums certainly, which is why I'm placing Comelys as my number 3. There are still 2 albums though I like more than Comelys. And this is where I've changed my mind a lot in recent weeks before undertaking this album ranking, because my number 2 is actually, it was my number 1 until last week. Number 2 is Karma Code. This was from 2006. This is a great album, and it's one that I think if you're only a casual fan, or if you only have casually listened to Comelys and say Unleashed Memories, and then you jumped off the Lacuna Coil bandwagon after those 2 albums, I think you missed out if you didn't check out Karma Code in the later era of the 2000s. This is a great album with, you know, a more Middle Eastern sound, actually, I have to say. You know, you got some lighter tracks on here, but they're lighter tracks that really work. The likes of Within Me and Without Fear, actually. Without Fear is a lovely track towards the end, I think, recorded in I think in Italian, or certainly in a different language. And that track really works for me as certainly a good track to have right towards the end of the record. I also really love What I See on here, and the heavier stuff on this album too works. Overall, it's a really, it's one of those kind of cohesive albums I think that works well from the start to the end. And yeah, this is why Karma Code comes in as my number 2, but it wasn't quite my favourite album. And, you know, Black Anima is not an album I've known for a very long time, I have to admit. But you know what? The more I've listened to it, the more I think this is their best album, Black Anima. It's got some really, really great material on this album. Really, like, catchy songs, but catchy songs that make an impact as well. And there are moments where I feel like Christina does couple of different things on this album as well. Like, she throws in some surprises here, which you don't always get on other Lacuna Coil albums, in my opinion. I think on this album she really comes to life in some ways, and I think that, as I say, that the Andrea Ferro moments are good here too, and that it's just overall a Night Studio album, quite late in their career, was an absolute banger of an album. You got tracks like Layers of Time, absolutely superb song. Beneficium, The End Is All I Can See, and Is It Reckless as well as another song I like on this album. You know, for me, this hits all the right notes. It has the classic Lacuna Coil formula. It's one of their more metal records as well, coming in the later era, but for me, it delivers on consistency, which is something Lacuna Coil I don't think have always had, consistency. But on this record, it's consistently excellent, and it just beats Karma Code by the narrowest of narrow margins. But it is my favourite album. It is my number 1 from this band. And thank you for watching this Lacuna Coil Albums Rankings video. As I say, do let me know your rankings in the comments. Otherwise, from me, until the live stream, which is coming up shortly on this channel, where I'm going to be talking about the return of the channel and some slight changes here on the Green Man. But otherwise, from me, until next time, guys, it is, as ever, bye for now.